Good afternoon. This is the last panel of the International Livestock Farming and Climate Change. My name is Rafael Safra. I work at the Department for Animal Health at the University of Córdoba, the veterinary faculty. We have touched upon several aspects, and now we're about to talk about health-related issues. We're going to talk about parasites, parasitism, and parasitism is very important because it is the cause of losses, of economic losses, loss of milk production, loss of wool production, and it is mainly due to gastrointestinal nematodes. And there are certain conditions that make animals more vulnerable to those parasites. And in our case, it is even more important because parasite treatments, anti-parasite treatments are very limited. So all these nematodes, when they're infecting our animals and develop in certain conditions of temperature and humidity. In the climate change context, these conditions vary, and we can find differences in the seasonality of these conditions. This is why we're participating in this project. We're participating in the part that focuses on the improvement of pastures, and we've been trying to demonstrate the influence of climate change on the parasite cycles and their prevalence in extensive livestock farms. Therefore, in the future, we could create models to improve risk assessment models to improve the management of livestock. And we've also started a test of alternative antiemetics using meadow species that have got clear antiparasitic properties, and also a strategy to decrease the development of nematode larvae. We have carried out this project with Vicente, with the Animal Production Department. We have worked on 10 farms in the southwest of Spain, 146 cattle and heads of cattle and 671 sheep. We have sampled, we've taken samples and analyzed them with the McMaster technique that has allowed to quantify the number of eggs from the feces of the animals that have parasites. We have, although we have 800, more than 800 samples, we have analyzed them twice, so we have more than 1,000 sample analysis results. We've used software that has allowed the assessment of the prevalence of these parasitism cases. And then if we have observed differences, statistical differences in the prevalence, we have applied a software called JSPT. I don't have much time, so I'll just mention that I've put here the results of 6 farms, and the parasites that you can see as the title of the columns are the ones that we found in the samples. We didn't go and look for a specific parasite species. We just detected the ones. Those are the species that we detected in the areas that we sampled. This table is very dense, so we have decided to present the results in a graph like this. In gray you have the winter results, and in green the summer results. You can see that the green columns are always higher than the gray columns. That means that the prevalence is higher in the summer, with a statistical with a sufficient statistical significance. We have carried out a statistical study, and we have found that in Strongylides and Dicrocelius dendriticum showed a clear pattern with the higher summer incidence, and Amelia in one farm was more associated to winter, and in another was more associated to summer. And the rest that you can see in the last section, you can find nematodes that are not very frequently found in our animals. I didn't say it before, but the first group is a group of gastrointestinal nematodes. So I'm sorry I had to rush so much, but the rest of the project I couldn't explain them, and I couldn't carry them. We couldn't carry them out, and that's why I said that we couldn't come to any conclusions on the following results. But we can discuss this over coffee if you want. What conclusions can we draw from this project? As you could see in the graph, Amelia and Strongylidae were the species that were more prevalent during the summer. In general, they were more prevalent in the summer in all farms, but the study has its limitations based on the fact that we should have a sampling method that includes the intermediate seasons, that is spring and fall, to see if we can observe a difference in seasonality. Due to the biological cycle of those organisms, they were sampled in, they were infected in the spring if we found them in the feces of the animal in summer, and in the fall if we found them in winter. So we need to extend the sampling season. And also we couldn't carry out the study of spores. I don't know if you know Edward Wilson. Edward Wilson is one of the fathers of biodiversity. He used to say that it was absurd to let tropical rainforest disappear. We don't have tropical rainforest here, but we do have dehesas, and it is absurd to let it disappear. Luckily, there are projects like this that gives us the opportunity to preserve it. And now I'm going to introduce other colleagues that will talk about these themes, about different perspectives. First one is João Simões, veterinary health management on dairy cattle farms. Oscar Garcia will talk about organic livestock farming and alternative therapies. And then Maria del Carmen Garcia will talk about land management and local breeds. Telmo Nunes will talk about monitoring the impact of climate change on animal health. João.
I will talk about I will talk about animal welfare and health in a perspective of health management and the One Health. The goal is simple. We need to have healthy animals with an adequate level of welfare and with the highest performance for the specific species and breeds. Also, we have a social demand for welfare. And these pose some questions about how we can produce with an added value, not only for animal protein, but also for animal protein with this welfare value. And what is welfare? Welfare is based on the 5 freedoms. Freedoms from hunger, from discomfort, from pain, injury, and disease, freedom to express the natural vehicle, and freedom from fear and distress. Mental, this is a psychological aspect, and this is the humanization of the animal welfare. This means that the animal is sentient. They can suffer, and they are emotions, and they have emotions like fear. So, classically, we treat the animal by ambulatory clinics, but through the years, this activity was moved to the health management. And this health management, together with the sanitary plans, the basis of to ensure this aspect of animal health. But what is animal health? Animal health classically is the absence of disease. But this is a strict concept of animal health. Today, there are an holistic approach based on the concept of total well-being, and there are a deep interrelationship of physiological, psychological, and social components. If we remember the definition of the World Health Organization, this is the concept for human health. So we also have other challenges like the zoonosis disease, like the antimicrobial and antiparasitic resistance, and we need to approach the control of this disease according to the environment, to the animal populations, and to the human population. This interface is multidisciplinary and is the center of the One Health. If you consider the animal health as an interrelation of these three aspects, the One Health is the One Welfare. And we need to evaluate these aspects on welfare and also on health. So there are also 5 domains to evaluate: the nutrition, the environment, the health, and the behavior of the animals. And all these 4 aspects are responsible for the last aspect, is the psychological state of the animals. So there are several methods to assess. Normally we can quantify some of them, but the great part we only can qualify. And we made class from 0 to 100%, per example. And this is there have a linear score. And with this is possible to score this evaluation on the animal welfare. And we have for 10 or more years, we have the welfare quality assessment protocol, that this protocol is used to, for marketing purpose, of course, but to score and to qualify the different farms. And this is important for the consumer. But if you want to approach this One Health, if you want to approach the health status of the animal, we need to revisit an old concept, is the epidemiologic triad. This is very important. Here, there are an example of the COVID-19, because the health status is not only to have or don't have the disease. It depends of the nature of the agent, of the environment, and of the host. Normally, the agent is classified as a more or less virulent agent. they can cause more or less damage to the organism. In the second part, we have several factors to contribute for the presence of this agent, namely the load of the viral particles of the bacteria and of the parasite and other even abiotic agents. And finally, we have the host. This host can be more or less susceptible to the agent. And this susceptibility depend of the age, of the gender, of the presence of other disease, but the great aspect is the immunitary state. So we have different aspects to consider to prevent the disease. This disease can be prevented by preventing the risk factor, using as example the environment, and can be made using to improve the host immunity by vaccination. We have different aspects when we work with confined, closed populations and open populations like the extensive systems. And to prevent disease, we have three main cases: the biosecurity, the vaccination, and the selective breeding. On one side, normally the closed population are intensive population indoor. The most advanced technology is, for example, for broilers. We have a building where the environment is controlled for temperature, for humidity, and for ventilation. In this case, there are a great biosecurity. In contrast, for the open populations, we have a close contact with the environment, and we have an interface with the wild animals. So the pathogen can circulate in the environment and from wild animals to domestic animals. The measures for the biosecurity is lower for these populations. It's not easy to quantify the welfare for these intensive and extensive populations. But in the last years, there are some studies that can try to make this difference. Here, for example, we have a better performance for a system where the grazing is made for more than 12 hours. And in this case, probably due to the more space for the exercise of these animals, we have less injuries, less trauma, and we have the more level of the absence of the pen. Other recent studies confirm that the security area is less strong in open populations than in closed populations. In this case, they try to quantify some antibodies, but there are not evidence of difference between the two systems except for the herpes virus, the IgB antibodies. These IgB can provide from natural or infected cattle. So, it's not simple to evaluate if closed population have more or less prevalence of disease than open populations. Other point is the resistance, the resilience, and the resistance to disease. This can be made traditionally with some breedings, and there is possible to turn animals and even the systems more resilient to the disease. And this one way for the resilience of the earth and of the production system. There are now the edition of the genome, and this is a new era, but we can talk about because they are genetically modified organisms, and this is a problem for the public and even for the governments. Also, in organic farms, it was found that the main problems, even with other prevalence, they persist in this type of farms. So the control of disease is not linear, and this control needs to obey to the different factors. If not, we can control the disease. Finally, we have also direct and indirect effect of the climate change on the animal yield. The indirect effects are due to the weather. There are a change, as example, from the external parasitic cycles. There can have also an alteration of the vectors for emerging disease, but there are also important direct effects on the animals, mainly acting in the center, the hypothalamic center of the anger for the diminution of the input, the feeding input, and whilst at hormonal level, mainly with the cortisol, and they cause immunosuppression state that turn the animal more susceptible to disease. So, as conclusion, we need to have a holistic approach. We need to consider not only animal health, but also the human health and the environment. And I think that the approach of One Earth is the future in the next decades. Thanks.
Hola. Tengo una mala noticia.
I have bad news. I'm not going to talk about organic farming or alternative therapies. I've just discovered the title of my presentation. Well, I will refer to it indirectly. I work with organic animal farming, with alternative therapies. I've worked a lot in the past and with alternative therapies, but my focus has changed, and currently I'm not so worried about what therapies we use, but we rather about what we can use that are not therapies. So I will refer to it indirectly. When my friends from the organization committee invited me, I thought I had something to say. I don't want to be unmodest, but with all those people that have talked about innovation, since I'm already here, I'd like to say something that I think could be useful, and I think I prefer to talk about it. That is, base myself on my experience and my history as a veterinary specialized in cattle. Well, 20 years experience, not 20 years of age. And I will try to adopt an approach that is based on the fact that livestock animal farmers are my colleagues. That's how I consider them. I work in close connection with them. What can be useful of what I'm about to tell you is that due to circumstances, I've gone from a very primitive milk-producing livestock farming system. I've gone then to a more modernized system. Then I've been working with extensive livestock farming. 20 years ago, I started working with organic animal farming. It was a revolution for me. And due to my relationship with the organic animal farming, I've discovered new things for me: holistic management, regenerational agriculture, etc. And this gives some coherence to my mental chaos, because I've had the opportunity to apply different concepts, techniques from one model to the other. So if I had to take a position, my position would be a transborder from position. That's where I live. You know that borders are difficult to live in. Border regions are difficult to live in, but I'm an admirer of Boaventura Sosa Santos, who proposed that we should live in the limits of the system, creating emancipation spaces and trying to get in and out of the system, and that is what he defines as navigating through the system. Based on this perspective, I've started to develop some ideas more specific to extensive livestock farming. It is probably not the case of this conference, but it is very common in society and in the policy agenda to refer to this dichotomy between extreme and between extensive and intensive livestock farming. It seems there's nothing in between. It's either confined cattle or grazing, free-ranging animals. In between, there are lots of situations that coexist and that I know from my experience in rural areas, and that are completely respectable. I think there is a certain trend to polarize and find good and bad, and that is the easiest way to approach the analysis. I don't know if this is fair, but anyway, I think it doesn't help in the necessary change with which I think we all agree. If we want to change and leave all those situations out, that would be very difficult to be classified as extensive or intensive livestock farming. Implies that we forget about transition models, and that imply a more bottom-up approach based on the perspectives of real livestock farmers from our regions. If we don't start from that, we can't do much. My experience with organic farming has been both from a distribution and a production perspective, has been that we have been confined to one of those two extremes, and we've been a bit elitist in many cases, and we've left a big space for the industry or industrial farming that has stepped in. And I'm going to refer to something that João has mentioned. Sometimes we think that when we just say the word extensive livestock farming, all issues related with health, animal health and animal welfare are solved. Well, we could talk about it for hours, but according to my experience, the interaction with the human beings is something that breaks this myth according to which extensive livestock farming equates to wildlife, almost based, I think, on an Anglo-Saxon tradition. As my friend Vicente Rodriguez explained very well a few years ago in Ronda, domestication consisted in bringing the animals home. That's the etymology of the word. And what I can observe in extensive livestock farming is that the presence of humans is a cause of stress, whereas in more confined farming models, we can find that the interaction with human beings can lead to better welfare conditions. I'd like to talk about something in a more serious way. I'd like to explain how we work, and I work with Elvira Rodriguez. She's not here today, but I'd like to explain how we work with extensive livestock farming from a animal health point of view. I'll just give you an example that connects with what Rafa said: parasites, population, etc. And this integrates a bit what has been done at many levels: university, research, administration. We manage 90 farms that are grouped in an organization for health control. And what we do in terms of parasite control based on more organic techniques. First of all, we tend to try to lose our concerns about parasites. One thing is to have parasite-related diseases, and another thing is to simply have parasites that have to follow their own biological cycles according to the ecological conditions of the area. So we should be concerned, but not too much. And we spend a lot of time in collaboration with 2 universities of Madrid sampling feces. We use the McMaster analysis system. We have quite a reliable system, not so sophisticated as Rafael was showing, but it is quite reliable. So we know what the situation is, and we never prescribe an anti-parasite treatment if we don't have a very detailed knowledge of what the situation is. And then we also have to abide to the norms that are established for organic farming. We have to minimize treatments, and when we do prescribe them, they should be very selective on only certain animals, not the whole herd, with the less harmful products, ruling out the possibility of using imertin, and giving way to this slow but sure process of resistance to parasites, and through genetic selection process. So it is very easy to work like that with parasites. Sometimes we do use alternative therapies with other diseases, like viral diseases. We also constantly monitor the situation, sampling blood samples, serum samples from our animals. I'd like to refer to what Irene de Miguel said before concerning tuberculosis. We've been very critical on what has been done concerning tuberculosis. And as far as the clinical practice of following young animals, protecting veals in a very classic concept, that is still the core of our activity. And this is related with the different mindset. And a model that considers intermediate situations is much more viable, I think, than a model that is only focusing on the two extremes.
Sobre todo quiero agradecer.
I'd like to thank you for inviting me. It is a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to focus my presentation on animal well-being, but focusing on the One Health concept, as it has been mentioned. I think that extensive livestock farming has a future if we relate it with animal welfare and human health. We should understand that human health, animal welfare, and ecosystem quality are interrelated. They used to tell us at school that we could not have healthy animals if we didn't have healthy soils. So we should never lose sight of this. 60% of pathogens are derived from domestic animals. 75% of human pathogens, emerging human pathogens, are of animal origin. 80% of pathogens that are can be potentially used in bioterrorism are of animal origin. So we also have a food security issue. Every night 811 million people go to bed without eating enough. We should think of increasing by 70% animal proteins by 2050. And there's also a loss of more than 20% of animal production due to animal diseases. And then the environment, human activities have altered greatly 75% of terrestrial and 65% of marine environment. Look at this. This sentence says, eating meat destroys the planet. Is this true? Is this statement true? I'll show you two photos.
Estaba el cereal, donde era un cereal de secano que se.
This photo comes from the highlands of the province of Granada, where we have steppe species that, like the one you can see here. This meat is much more sustainable than and what you can see here is almond production with no vegetable land cover, vegetation cover, and in a totally unsustainable way. This is what has happened to these highlands in Granada. So we shouldn't polarize the debate. When we talk about extensive livestock farming, we don't even know exactly what it is. So they with all the benefits that it generates, we haven't even defined what it is. If we group all the intensive livestock farms together, one of the main problems is nitrate pollution. And here you can see a map where those problems are located. Whereas if you overlap the map of extensive livestock farming, you can find the network, Natura 2000 network, and it is almost exactly the same. And then you can also overlap it to the map of more reduced emissions. And now I can ask you, where does health start? Health, we said, has got to do with everything, with humans, with animals, and with our soils. That's where our health starts. And extensive livestock farming, as you can see, is managing one of the areas, some of the areas that have got the highest ecosystem value. That is the Natura 2000 network. This is the photo I took about 10 years ago, and this is what I can find now. So my question is, where is the skin of the planet? How many tons of soil will we lose in a year? We require 2,000 years to just to generate a few centimeters of soil, and we will just lose it in 1 year. When we saw those images of the cathedral, Notre Dame Cathedral, burning down, we were all shocked. Well, doing this is equivalent to burning this cathedral. And this is not what I think. This is based on the statistics from the ministry, Spanish ministry. If we sum up the land use changes in the past 10 years, we'll see that natural grasslands have decreased by 2%. 2%. That pasture land has decreased by 12%, and that there's no way out. You either intensify your activity or you go out of business. And the Paris Agreement establishes that we should reduce emission by 4%, and if we continue doing this, we'll decrease the organic carbon, soil organic matter by 0.5%. And this is what the consequences are: loss of soil. We have just finished talking about soil. Now we can talk about animal welfare. As it has been defined, animal welfare consists of being free of hunger, fear or distress, physical ill treatment, etc. We can here you can see the welfare of our animals in extensive farms. And now the question is, do we really differentiate this when we buy meat? Do we give value to all those issues when we buy meat? The answer is clearly no. If I had to do this in kind of a interconnected boxes, I would find this result. Extensive livestock farming generates landscape keeps ecosystems in good conditions, generates ecological corridors, and increases organic matter. But do we make their life easy for extensive animal farmers? Not really. The more extensive you are, the more problems you have to face, because besides the health issues that have been referred to, you have problems in acquiring rights to receive aid. The more extensive you are, the more problems you have, bureaucratic problems in accessing to support. We go to the countryside with asking questions like, do you do sampling of water? And imagine if you ask this to a herder that is up in the mountains herding their sheep. So extensive livestock farming has got many benefits, but then when you go and buy meat, you probably have been to the supermarket and have been buying meat, and no one has been able to tell them where this meat came from, whether it was extensive or intensive livestock farms. So the question is, do we buy according to where the product comes from and to its level of quality? Has public administration done enough to differentiate the product according to the quality and the quality of the environment? I think that those two elements, sustainable and healthy, should go hand in hand, and common diseases linked to food and diet are advancing or increasing, and we should transform our food systems to make extensive livestock farming viable, including animal welfare. And we should integrate in this pyramid that we always see the idea of sustainability and of healthy food. We have many local breeds, and we have some breeds that only have 500 individuals in the whole world, and so we end up having more lynx than rare local breeds. How is it possible that we are forbidding the use of grazing animals to keep this vegetation cover under control in this type of croplands? I'd like to finish my presentation thanking all the people that make this possible, and that we often neglect and forget. We should start with the soil, and with everything else try to improve the quality of our environment.
Buenos días, me llamo Olivier Morin, soy ganadero en los Pirineos, Francia, y crío.
My name is Olivier Morin, and I come from the Pyrenees, from France. I raise pigs, sheep, and cows. We do very short transhumance, 3 months during the summer. It's a very important transhumance. We do our migrations in an area in the National Park of the Pyrenees. Our breeding systems are a natural sign of well-being, but because our animals are made to live outdoors, And well-being outdoors is perfect as long as you don't have attacks from wolves and bears, of course. I'm going to talk about genetics. We do a very specific work on the genetics of local breeds. With the CONAM, the collective of the breed from the Massif, we're working on this field, and I'm the president of a breeders organization. We work on 3 dairy goat species. For 30 years, we have worked on genetics to increase productivity. Productivity is really important because we have the threat of incoming breedings of foreign breeds. But there has been a change recently because climate change is forcing us to take into consideration the changes, and also because society is changing its opinion, and also because of the feed. And another aspect is the situation of the environment and how our practices can harm the environment. If we don't work on local breeds, autochthonous breeds, there is an important danger of losing many advantages. If we lose our breeds, there's going to be a loss in biodiversity. There's going to be a loss in biodiversity because these breeds will be gone, and we will lose our autonomy in terms of forage because these animals can eat our forage, and we are going to lose many positive impacts in our territories, social and economic impacts, and ecosystemic services. And we would also lose in terms of quality of our products. For us, genetics, breeding is a leverage to improve animal welfare. I just talked about productivity, and I must say that now we're focusing on criterions for our breeding. We focus on longevity, health, strength, and resistance to diseases like mastitis, parasites, leg issues, and the survival of lambs. Our objective is to have healthy animals that are adapted to their environment. I'm going to talk briefly. I mean, we could talk about this topic for hours and hours, but I'm going to describe this project as fast as I can. This project is called Fenopasto. We just started it, and we are creating a genetic services platform to adapt the local sheep breeds to the challenges of climate change and the agroecological transition. This platform is being created here in the Atlantic Pyrenees in France. So how did we create this platform? There was a call for tenders by Europe, and the project was called Smarter. It's a European project. We were requested to prepare the animals that are needed for the future, to prepare the sheep that are needed for the future. In this project, we have 3 countries working together. There are 27 international partners, research partners, and the purpose is to work on phenotypes. So when we did the validation, there's a innovation transfer, and selection of breeding schemes will be designed. These will be some innovations that may be replicated in other local breeds that want to work based on this criteria. To avoid suffering, animal suffering, the genetic leverage is very important. We work collectively. A collective leverage that is sustainable accelerates adaptation mechanisms. It's very simple. We're not modifying or creating a different animal. We are just detecting the animals that in one place adapt better than others. Genetics are accumulative. You can have a 10% genetic progress in 15 years. The need to work on animal adaptation is necessary both in terms of the breed as well as on breeding systems. So we have to decide the selection criteria. For example, here we decided to work on emissions, gas emissions, and gas emissions comes from digestion, pasture digestion. So not all animals have the same values when it comes to emissions. Some will emit more gases than others. Genetics play a role, but you also have to work on management practices. Then we also have food efficiency. These are some of the criteria that have been retained for the project. So we have emissions, food efficiency, the capacity to value or to use pasture resources. So again, genetics play a role, but then we have the type of feeds that are available, and that includes the role of mechanics, etc. Now animals are eating good food all year round in a farm, but in order to be able to use places as grasslands, sometimes we have to improve certain animals for them to be able to use the grasslands better. We have to work on the robustness of our animals. I'm going to give you an example. We're talking about the rusticity of the animals, or hardiness. This is a criteria that we are working on, and it's an urgent aspect. This is a problem that we have been mentioning. Resistance to parasites. I can, right now, as of today, there are products that I cannot use. For example, if you have a dairy farm, there are certain drugs that you cannot use. And then we have resistant parasites, and we have another problem, that is that we have been able to attest that some of these drugs are very negative, have a very negative aspect and a very negative impact on coprophag animals, coprophagous wildlife. Now we were working on natural animal resistance, and in our sheep population we have stated that some sheep are naturally resistant. So after 2 years, thanks to our breeding techniques, artificial insemination, we can use the sperm of the sheep that are more resistant, naturally resistant. So that's how we're working on our breeding system. We don't have much time, so I just want to mention the most important aspects. So all in all, what I want to say is that genetics are a really good tool to adapt our breeds to what's happening in terms of climate change. But of course, organization is necessary. We are working on breeding to improve our milk production, and now engineering is also helping us. And engineering is helping us to move forward and work on all of these criteria. We have to I have to catch a train in a few minutes, so I may not be able to stay for the whole Q&A session. If someone has any questions, I'm going to leave my contact here, and please contact me or contact my group. Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to be part of this Congress, and my presentation will be in English because otherwise I would spend 5 minutes, half of my presentation, trying to look for the right words.
First, I will introduce myself. I'm a teacher of veterinary epidemiology and veterinary public health at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, and I work closely with the official veterinary services in Portugal. On my presentation, I'll try to address a very simple question. We've been hearing, I arrived late yesterday, but I was on time to be here on the discussion of politics, and today we talked about, I'll say it in Spanish, PAC, and inversiones to fight or to mitigate climate change. The thing is, we need to justify those investments. We need to justify those policies. And for that, we need to have indicators of the impact that climate change has in animal health. So I'll be talk about this monitoring of climate change impacts on animal health. And now you will think that veterinarians like triangles, because once again, I have this triangle of the epidemiological triad. The only thing here that I want to focus is that this is a balance, this is an equilibrium. And of course, this balance between environment, agent, and host, for the problems that we already have, we have it under control, under balance. The problem is when we have external drivers that change this balance. And what we can expect with climate change, what is predicted, I will try to maybe focus here on the Mediterranean area. And what you can see is that we are expecting warmer temperatures, high events of extreme events of temperature, and also extreme events of precipitation, heavy precipitation, and droughts. And how will that affect this balance? This is especially important here on this triad, is this piece here of the vector diseases. And it's very important because vectors, their activity, their cycle is extremely influenced by external factors. Here in the environment, I have a farmer. Well, let's assume it's a farmer. But because farmers can influence the environment where animals, to which animals are exposed to. But in extensive systems, there are some limitations on the impact that, or the effect of the farmer in that environment to the animals. And before I ask about impacts, we must think about what type of diseases we can have. Well, some are not even infectious diseases. We have heat stress. This week in Portugal, we have a new committee to discuss the excess mortality in persons, in humans, in people. And most of that excess mortality, besides COVID, it's attributed to heat waves. And the fact is, not only people die in heat waves, when we have heat waves, also animals die in heat waves. And this is an example of work, some work that was done by a master student of ours that worked with me. And what we tried to do was try to see, well, let's see how mortality changes considering the weather. And how much time after a heat wave does the mortality increase? And what you can see here, this is just for, and we did this for different age classes. This is for the age classes from the 60 to 120 days. And you can see here below, we have the temperature and humidity index. And when the temperature and humidity index increases, we have immediate, and this is the lag, or I don't even know in Spanish to help, but in Portuguese, the desfazamento, the time between the event, the increase of the temperature, and the death of the animals. And you can see that you have really immediate effects. And with increases, so the risk of an animal dying when the temperature humidity index gets to a certain point increases by 1.5. So it's 50% higher chances of an animal dying at those levels. So we already have that, but we can also think about vectorial diseases, and mainly we have some good examples. I don't need to show you this trend that we have been seeing of vector-borne diseases, because you know blue tongue was something that was not so common in Europe, and now it's almost in Norway we have blue tongue virus. Lumpy skin disease, it's a good example, also approaching our territories. And Rift Valley fever, the same thing, still in North Africa, we can expect. Also for Spain, Crimea Congo hemorrhagic fever, also a problem, and was something that was unknown. These are just examples, because there are many, many more. But also other diseases, and some of those that we know. Bovine tuberculosis. Extreme drought can increase we have a problem with, at least in Portugal, with bovine tuberculosis, is that we have the disease circulating in wild animals where we don't make any control. And when we have extreme temperatures and extreme drought, if we don't manage the water sources, we will increase the contact rate between wild animals and domestic animals and increase transmission between those species. And also leptospirosis. If we have events of extreme precipitation, we can have outbreaks of this disease. And this is the disease where I will give an example of using this monitoring approach to the impacts. How do we control these emergent diseases? We can set up surveillance systems, we can buy vaccines and we can stock the vaccines, we can develop the laboratorial methods, but it's an expense, and we have limited resources, so we need to justify the allocation of our resources to control or mitigate these diseases. And for that, it's very important here, the impact assessment, to know what is the impact. So I will give you an example with leptospirosis. I'm not sure if it's a problem on extensive farming systems in the south of Spain. In Portugal, we have serious problems with leptospirosis. And well, let's call it almost many agents, different serotypes. Usually, again, is a balance. The host is adapted to or a specific serotype is adapted to a specific host. And when we expose different hosts to that serotype, we have more evident disease or more serious disease. And in the early 2001, we had a big outbreak of leptospirosis in Portugal. After a year, 2020 was a dry year, and in the end of the winter of 2021, we had major rain events in the south of Portugal. And the colleagues were telling me that we were having high mortality. But one thing is to say high mortality, the other thing is to say, what does that mean in numbers? What is the expression of that? So to know that, we need to first know the population, then see what is the normal mortality, and then see if there's an excess mortality. And this step of knowing the population is important if you want to look at different age structure, because in average we can have the same population. In the south of, in Alentejo region, we have about 600,000 bovines or cattle, but you can see there is a fluctuation between winter and summer because we have a seasonality of birth. So we had to calculate the population there. For that, we had needed the data of all animals that were going in and out of the population, birds, movements, exports, etc. And then we could calculate the mortality rate and see that, well, there is a seasonality effect on mortality, with higher mortality in winter, as I would say expected. And as you can see here, in fact, in January 2021, we have a really increase of mortality. It's almost, let's say, almost the double of the average mortality. The graph is not complete, but anyway, then we need to see what is the expected mortality. And what you can see here, the graphic was not, the conversion was not perfect, but the graphic here, the red line is the, we're missing something here, but the red line is the expected mortality. You cannot see it here in the graph. But what you can see here is that we have an increase on mortality on that period, but we also had an increase of mortality on previous periods. Oh, here it is, the graph, sorry. And here you can see this is no change, this line here, and you can see here on the leptospirosis outbreak, we have a considerable increase of mortality, and also we have a previous increase of mortality that you probably can explain what it is, but we have a previous increase in mortality in the previous summer. And what we can say with this approach is to estimate, and we can say that 3/4, we are talking about 3,000 animals that died more than expected in that period. And we have a bigger effect on younger animals than older animals, as expected for leptospirosis. But here we can measure something. We can say, we could start doing calculations and say, this will cost so much to the farmers, to the producers. And what we don't have here is what is the effect on calving, because there is expected some abortion. What is the economical impact? How can we prevent new outbreaks? This is all work that has still to be done. We haven't done that work yet. So just to finish, and I'm sorry that I took a bit more than 10 minutes, impacting indicators are important if we want to make decisions about mitigation policies. I don't see how we can, I have to, in my personal life, I have to know how much something will cost me before making a decision, and or how much something will cost me if I don't make a decision. So if we're talking about policies for a country or a region, then or a sector, then you need these indicators. And there was a discussion about digitalization. We wouldn't be able to calculate these indicators without digitalization, because this is information that exists, is in the system, on the official veterinary services systems, the movements, the deaths, all that. But if we want to refine our calculations and our indicators, if we want to know what happened in terms of production, we need better data that is not available yet. But we also need not only to collect the data, but to create the systems to digest this data and create the indicators. And that's something that, from what I know, I'm talking on the Portuguese side, also on the Spanish side, I have an idea that doesn't exist. We need to create those systems that monitor the population and try to identify these excess mortality events or excess production losses events. So these systems still need to be created. And of course, this is not just a work for veterinarians or epidemiologists. This is a work that needs a collaboration between different sectors. But I believe that is possible to do. We are starting our mortality monitoring system, the development now in Portugal, and I hope in 1 year to have it ready and available to all the farmers and all the producers, so they can even benchmark and see how well they are doing. Thank you very much.
¿Se escucha por aquí? Sí. Bueno, me dicen que no hay tiempo para preguntas.
I'm told that we have no time for question and answers. Probably we can discuss a little bit more over a beer or lunch, since many people have to leave. And Nuno referred to multidisciplinary approaches. There was a member of parliament in the United States that said that it is important to have a healthy planet, healthy people that live on a healthy planet. And we know that we still have